Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Justin the Food Entrepreneur Show. I'm Justin Bizzarro. I'm your host. That's Bizzarro. You can find us on Instagram or Facebook at Justin the Food Entrepreneurs and at Justin Bizzarro. We are more active and engaged on Instagram. That's where we communicate back and forth, DMs, stuff like that. If you guys want to be on the show, there is a link in the episode notes. Every single episode that's been released in what I will call this season since December of 2024. There's the link in there. So you click on the calendar link and you guys can get to the show there. Additionally, if you guys want to find us, you can also find us at Gorilla Brave. That is the food and beverage community that everyone asks for, with all of the educational information, the notes, the shows, the stuff from me, the community for all the food and beverage, hospitality, nutrition, farming, entrepreneurs, all of you guys, networking events, summits, all that stuff coming through there. It's been a while. I know you guys have been asking for a long time. It's just taken me a while to get there. I have very special guests with us today. I have Alex Pope from Local Pig and PigWich. How are you doing today, Alex?
Great, Justin. Thanks for having me on.
You're very welcome. Alex, let's dive into your story a little bit here. Let's talk about how you became a food entrepreneur, all the way from little Alex to big Alex, and sort of getting into this. And because we don't just end up restaurateurs, we don't just end up food entrepreneurs. There is a journey, there is a pattern that leads to it. So I just love to tell your story. The mic is yours, and I'll ask questions as I have them.
Great. Yeah. Well, thanks again for having me on.
Absolutely.
My story starts while I was in college. So I did not know, initially that food was the avenue I wanted to go down. But when I started college, University of Wisconsin at Madison, and it was about my sophomore year, and I needed a job. I've had a job since I was 15, and I wanted to keep money coming in and, engage in work. And I had been doing insurance work, which was mind numbing. And I wanted a new direction, and there was a restaurant opening down the street from where I lived, and I just kind of walked in and said, "Hey, I'd love to cook. You had a spot for me?" And they were desperate, as the new restaurant usually is, and they said yes. And after that, I got hooked, and I loved cooking. I loved being on the line. I loved all of it, and I just never really looked back. I did finish college. I got a degree in economics. My parents were pretty adamant that was the direction to go, to at least get that done, since I was already halfway through. And they were right. It was a good idea. And so after I graduated from college, I went to culinary school in New York City, and a place called Institute for Culinary Education. Great school. Learned a lot. Did a restaurant management and culinary degree simultaneously. Love New York. But my girlfriend and fiance wanted to be in Kansas City, Missouri, and so off we went. She had some family here, and I'm glad she did, because I have lived here for more than 20 years, and I completely love it. It's a great mix of a big city and a small town, places I've lived in the past, and I love it. So I moved here and started line cooking at a fabulous restaurant, now closed, called the American Restaurant. Just a big old school fancy place. One of those places you just aren't many anymore. And I was a line cook there. I was promoted eventually to a sous chef position, and I was the sous chef there for 3 years before I decided it was time for me to get out and try my hand at running my own kitchen. So I got a position as an executive chef at a place called R Bar, which is now gone, but was a great, super fun place. The owner, her name is Joy Jacobs. She took a risk on me. I was 26, I think, at the time, 25, but just totally passionate about what I was doing. And she let me write seasonal menu. We did a whole new menu, 25 items every 3 months. And it was very intense, and I learned a ton, and I loved it. Great atmosphere. But I also learned that full service restaurants were not going to fit the life I wanted as I had gotten older. So, about 28, after 3 years at our bar, my wife and I we wanted to have a kid, and she worked normal job, 9 to 5 style job. So I was looking for something that was still food adjacent, but was not, a full service restaurant hours, home at midnight, in at 8 a.m. all the time. So I decided I needed to work for myself. That's really one thing I learned from being in restaurants, is that the best avenue for me was going to be working for myself. And I just wanted to find a way to get my foot in the door that way. And I decided that a meat market butcher shop would be a great avenue. I had taught myself how to do butchering, how to do, whole carcass, whole animal fabrication, and all the derivative charcuterie products from doing that over the years at our bar and at the American restaurant. And I decided there was a niche that I could fill here in Kansas City, which was locally sourced meat. This was 2012, before people were selling things on the internet, selling meats, locally sourced meats like farmers do now. You could get it at the farmers market, but that was it. So I had all these contacts with local farms from working with them, and I decided this was the way to go. So I opened Local Pig in 2013. We started with one 6-foot deli case, a couple hogs, one whole beef, a couple dozen chickens, and we just kept going. So we were getting in the whole animals, and by whole I mean like a pig that was slaughtered and split down the middle. And we were selling the pork chops, making bacon, making sausage, making head cheese and terrines, and all sorts of different interesting products. We're bringing in beef by the side and selling all the steaks and doing everything we could with the rest of the animal, which led me to my next realization. After about 6 months of running a meat market, I realized that if you're going to run a whole animal meat market, you have to find a way to sell ground beef. And you have to make money at your ground beef. And so my restaurateur brain kicked in and said, all right, I need to sell cheeseburgers. And it took about 6 months, but in the end, the best solution for this was actually a food truck. The building we were in at the time was old. I think it was built in 1880, and it was serviceable for what we were doing as a meat market, but there was no way to retrofit it for a proper hood, grease trap, and all the things that I was going to need to run it. So found a food trailer. This was a big old 40-foot long, 8-foot wide. It was a trailer that someone was using for just to sell fried chicken out of at county fairs. So it didn't actually get a ton of use, but it was set up for volume. So I found that thing in Indiana, hauled it back.
That is a great find. Go on. I have a lot of questions for you. Keep going. I love your story. Go on.
Yeah. What's your question, man?
No, I will go back to the beginning. I'm going to let you get to the opening of the trailer, and then I'm going to go back and ask some questions. I love it. Go on.
For sure. So yeah, I found that thing at a used car lot in Indiana and drove it back. Blew one of the axles out about 100 miles outside of Kansas City, parked it outside of the restaurant, and didn't move it again for 7 years until we sold it. We plumbed it into the power and in the plumbing, and just let that thing sit outside. We built stairs around it. We built a lean-to for a bunch of tables, and we just made a little infrastructure around it, and it got super popular. That was how PigWich was born.
This is incredible. So one of the things I want to go back and talk about, this sort of the falling in love with the food. Let's start there. Let's talk about the cooking. Let's talk about the skill. Had you cooked in the restaurant environment before you sort of jumped into it in the new restaurant?
Well, sort of.
Yeah.
When I was 15, my first job was at Hardee's over the summer for 3 months. They mostly just let me do the register, but on break, I could go back and cook what I wanted to eat. So I had been in the vicinity of a commercial kitchen, but never employed as a cook. Just a front counter guy at Hardee's when I was a kid.
So let's talk about this. Let's talk about your cooking, your recipes. I don't even know where to begin. It is a new restaurant. So let's narrow in on that experience for a second, because it's obviously a huge growing one, like being the cooking part is the most important part of the restaurant. So talk to me about what's going on there, that experience, because you had to be growing. It's like growing like out of a fire. It's like a fire
Yeah,
hose scenario.
it was. Yeah. So when I started at this restaurant in Madison, I was a sophomore in college. I was doing classes in the mornings because I was trying to keep my evenings free to do work and other stuff. So, I would come in and I'm sure you've opened a restaurant. It's wildly hectic. And, it's just kind of get in where you fit in. And that's what I did. They put me on garde manger and said, you're making salads. And I said, all right. And they had, the executive chef was training everybody. So he was training me too, which was great. It wasn't just some random garde manger guy training me. And, he was a good teacher. They had good standardized recipes and they said, do it this way. And I just listened and said, okay, you got it. And, there's an intensity and a focus about it. And it was like, unlike any working thing I had ever done. I had been working in offices before then. So the intensity level it was just one of those things like, it just fit. I don't know why, but some part of growing up had gotten me ready for being in an intense environment, and I caught on quickly. And when you're just good at something relatively quickly, it feels good, and you want to keep going with it. And that was my experience. Was great. I'm on garde manger. Teach me the next thing. So everybody else on the line was smoking cigarettes, and just at that time wasn't, and they would leave and say, all right, cover my station. So I would, I'd get 10 minutes to try saute, to try grill. And, I loved all of it.
I want to point out something here in the restaurant world, what happens, the compounding effect, the stress levels, all of it is on a whole different level. But people ask me all the time, like, they see it as the ease of cooking in your home, and it's just not even close to the same scenario. The amount of orders, the differences, menus, especially as you get higher end, like there's a lot of things that go into the construction of just one plate. And so a lot of different jobs as well. And I think there's an orchestration there. I think that's one. Number two is working in a kitchen there's two ways I can say it. It's like, everyone else goes to Gold's Gym and takes their time working out, but then there's CrossFit. Okay. Or there's NASCAR, and then there's Formula One. Okay. The stress, the intensity for 8 hours, 10 hours, whatever your shift ends up being. And it's not necessarily a clock on and off. It's not necessarily punch in and out like you would normally expect. You try to do that for everyone and your employees and yourself, but the demand of the kitchen is the demand of the kitchen, and employees out or in still means the food has to get done. So the stress level, the tangible items that still need to go out the door, short-staffed, overstaffed, bad things happening, shortages of ingredients, whatever's going on, everything still has to get out the door. The restaurant still has to run and deliver meals to customers that have no idea what's going on in the back. So I think that that's an important skill set you're gaining there. Talk to me about that stress. You find comfort in it. What is it that what is it that this allows you to do? Because it is a different level of stress, and it is a special kind of human that can handle it and what I would call thrive in it.
Yeah. Especially at that first job as open kitchen, whole dining room was looking at you. And, I don't know. It didn't click for me right away, but there's just some like level of, performance, I don't know if it's sports training or just general mental, kind of where you land in life. But for whatever reason, I was ready for that. And I just continued to enjoy it as I moved through my career and come back to it over and over again, that, the stress gets me focused, and not distracted, very focused on, the task at hand. I don't actually cook anymore, but, I did for many, 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 many years. And it always is something that can just completely consume your mental capacity, which I find enjoyable, and I'm not getting distracted by other things.
One of the other things I think is there's a tangible thing that goes along with it where you're completing something, you can see your progress and deliver. It does get a little bit like Groundhog Day sometimes, but I think
But it's
that, yeah,
yeah, absolutely. Just getting a ticket, getting it finished, moving on, complete the task. Now my life is around checklists and things I need to get done off of my priority checklist. But it's not dissimilar in the sense that here's a ticket. I'm gonna make it. I'm gonna finish. I'm gonna execute correctly. Finish. Move on. Wherein in other fields you may have projects that stretch over days, weeks, months. To a degree, your project is that ticket, and you can just focus solely on doing that ticket and as fast as you can, as well as you can, and then get it going.
let's talk about moving into your first location as you create the local pig, you create the butcher, marketing, advertising, new kind of concept, new idea. You're in Kansas City. Let's talk about all of these things. Let's sort of talk about building it out, hiccups, learning permits, maybe some of the things you didn't learn from someone else, plus getting into butchering is a little bit of a interesting scenario. So let's go through all of that as well.
Yeah, yeah. No, I was kind of young and naive when I did this the first time. I was 27, 28, and it was one of those just don't know until you do it. And I just, had to just keep doing it. We definitely ran into some light permitting problems, but actually, in retrospect, nothing terrible. We had to change use, and which takes some time. But really, a lot of what I had to learn was, some of the big picture things. I'd been a chef for long enough that I could tell a crew what to do. Right, we could get the work done, but it's some of the other, all of the other things that took more time. And it's not to say that running payroll is difficult, but keeping track of sales tax and doing the other things that are around the business, but not the direct portion of cut a steak, sell it to somebody, make a cheeseburger, sell it to somebody. So there was a lot of learning curve for me on that. We opened with a very shoestring budget, and we had to basically just plow back in every dollar we made for the first 2 years just into upgrading equipment and making sure we were fixing the things that were breaking, because we weren't, when we first opened, we weren't buying nice stuff. It was just getting it ready. But we were really fortunate in the sense of the marketing that I had left the restaurant I was at and had some profile from doing that. So when we opened, this was still legacy media days. The print publications that were important at the time in town all covered what we were doing, and everyone found it very interesting. So we were actually busy right out the gate without having to put a lot of any energy into marketing. Our marketing at the time was just doing events. Hey, we're having a dine around event for 300, come and make some food. So we would do all of those. There's not really a large added cost to doing that outside of your time. So I would spend my time doing all those things that I could possibly do, is going to those events, talking to people and telling them what we were up to. Real, and I mean real in the sense that you're paying for it. Marketing education didn't really come for me until, much later down the line. When we started, we were fortunate to catch a tailwind from the experience I had doing other projects. I was doing a series of pop-up restaurants kind of in between my restaurant and my butcher shop that were going really well. So that got coverage. And, we had that legacy media coverage, which, is kind of faded now, but in 2012, 13, 14 was still pretty important.
Yeah, I love it. Let's talk about, so you find the food trailer. I know this is weirdly how similar we found a food trailer on the side of the road. We were in the restaurant equipment business. We were building and designing restaurants as the financial crisis happened. We diversified our business out of hospital food and long-term care feeding and retirement homes, and got into restaurants and restaurant food, and then acquired some companies. And either way, it was a bright orange converted car trailer into a food trailer. It was the first one we took on as a project. And yeah, we broke both axles. And
Yeah.
and it's just one of the things that they never can handle the weight for some reason of the stuff on there. I don't know why, but it's just I just one of these days. It's the most common thing I hear about food trailers. I guess it's better than a food truck and having the engine problems. It doesn't cost quite as much. But wow, yeah. So let's talk about bringing in the food trailer. Where does the idea come? Why create sort of a garden, an area? What starts that idea, that progress in your mind? What comes first, the chicken or the egg, I guess?
Yeah. So the first customer that walked into Local Pig on the first day we opened, in about 15 minutes, dude walks in. His name is Tony, and he ended up being a great customer. And he said, "Hey, you guys got any food? I'm hungry." And I said, "No, dude, we don't. We don't have any food. We got like pork chops and chicken." And he's like, "Oh man, I work at this place over here. There's a General Mills factory, a big employer in the neighborhood." He's like, "There's just nowhere to eat around here. So you've got to make lunch." And I had just finished telling myself over and over that I didn't want to be in the restaurant business anymore. And that was literally the first guy. He didn't buy anything. He walked out
Yeah.
because he wanted food. And I went, and that was the seed. And, it happened every day for months because there were, the place we were in was not a bad part of town. It's just an industrial part of town because the rent was cheap. So if there was just tons of people that worked all kinds of shifts down there, and there were no restaurants. So that was the start of it. So after a little while, I was like, okay, maybe we do need to do this. And I started looking into what it would take to build out the restaurant, or put a restaurant inside, and that was not going to work. So food trailer, food truck kind of was the only option. And then, I had to let the excess product from our whole animal meat market be the guide on what menu items we were going to do. So, we had a cheeseburger and a cheesesteak from the get-go because we had ground beef and round steaks, round roasts that needed to get gone. So those items got on. We had a pulled pork on because we always had pork shoulders and pork picnics that needed to go. We had a tenderloin on because there was usually pork loins that needed to go. And that was it. Once it was sort of just, all right, I have to sell ground beef, and the dudes that work around here drive big trucks, and they don't want this fancy food I've been cooking for a long time. They want a cheeseburger, and I know how to make a cheeseburger. Let's make a cheeseburger.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was the product to fit the neighborhood and to fit the needs of the meat market itself.
Yeah, you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. I'm sure.
Right.
So let's talk about the menu and the whole animal a little bit more. I like the connection there. Is it in? Gosh, I don't even know how to ask some of the questions. Do you do other animals? I mean, in some butcher shops I've talked to or done, like, do you take in, like, can you in Kansas or Missouri, I don't know, take in game meat and do it as a butcher shop and do outside butchering for people and stuff like that as well? Or is that something, like, talk to me about stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, that is an avenue we could go down, but it's a different kind of business than a retail meat market. So,
yeah, cool.
I mean, functionally, a retail meat market is the meat market at a grocery store. So the things you see at a meat market at a grocery store is what we do. So, we get in big pieces of meat, we cut them into smaller pieces, and then we take the leftover bits and make them, value add them, and sell them again. That's the real narrow or big picture. But we try to bring in as many different animals as we can get our hands on, ducks, turkey, lamb. We lost our goat suppliers. We're not doing goat right now, but really it's a lot of beef and chicken and pork, and then a few other animals. But those big three really are what we do.
Very cool. Let's talk about the employing everyone, training everyone. You went from the cook being trained on how to do everything. Now you're running a business. You're training both butchering, salesmanship, running a business. Then you bring in the food trailer. So now you're developing menus, SOPs, you're doing food certification. You have USDA over here, you have something else over there, your local health inspectors and both. Like, let's talk about combining that, employing that, orchestrating that. Now you're the one teaching everyone.
Yeah.
Talk to us
Yeah.
about that.
I didn't get good at training in SOPs until much later. When I first started, it was very much just, this is how we do it, catch on, because we're going at 100 miles an hour. And then, it was I've always been good at hiring the right people. So take the time to hire the right people. But I wasn't good at taking the right time to train them until much farther down the line. But we had a good culture of people teaching each other. We're good about standardized recipes, and we're good about making sure people are doing the same thing as much as we could. Not nearly as good as I am now, but when we first started, it was very seat of the pants, and I had a couple of really great staff members that helped me with the training and oversight. But it didn't really dawn on me until much later that I needed to standardize everything a lot more. So that's one of those things you learn as you get older, and that's one of the the cons of starting a business when you haven't had quite enough experience out in the real world. But you make up for that by just with hours worked and determination and just gutting it out. And that's what I did for a long time. I worked a lot harder before I started to work a lot smarter. And fortunately, we did not have to deal with USDA. USDA is a separate business. Our business was just health department, local health department. And, I understand what they need, and we've never had an issue there, thankfully.
Future, where do you hope this goes? What are your dreams? Sort of, why do you keep doing this? Talk to me about that. You've been in this 13 years now, so you continue to move forward, you continue to grow. So talk to me about that.
Yeah, growth is something that is challenging for us because we use this locally sourced supply chain. There is not we have a bit of a bottleneck in our supply. So, the big growth for us, I don't see a multi-unit growth future for this, but we did make a big growth move. We moved from our original location to a new location in 2019, and that allowed us to have an indoor dining room and attach the businesses, and that doubled our business overnight.
Yeah, let's talk about that transition.
Now the restaurant,
Yeah, let's talk about that transition real quick. Let's talk about, because you get rid of the food trailer, I believe.
Yeah.
And so now you move everything, now you're building. So what does that look like? How do you get to a point where you decide you want to brick and mortar it? Because it's a little bit different, right?
Yeah, I looked again at putting a kitchen into the building we were in. The suite next door became available. So we looked at it, and the landlord didn't want to sell us the building. And he said he would help us with the build out, but the build out ended up being that it would cost more than the building itself was worth. So, we couldn't get a loan on it. So I just said, this whole building has been great, but we need to find a real restaurant building. So I just started looking, and I found a spot I really liked, which is a spot we moved into, and there was the guy was selling some equipment, an auction site, not the whole place, but enough of it that it kind of made me wonder what he was up to. So I called the landlord for the spot and said, hey, if this guy's moving out, I want that spot. And he said, you know what? That's actually something we're talking about. Let me give you a call in a few months. And then we kept looking at other spots, kind of fell in love with another spot. And then our spot that we ended up moving into called back and said, yeah, we do want you here. So we went down that path, and it's been awesome. It's a place where the farmers market is on the weekends. It's the center of the city. It's a tourist destination. It's downtown. There's tons of people around. So we've got tons of people. And we went from, the restaurant being 30% of the business to now the restaurant's 70% of the business, which, on my end is great because the margins are so much better at a restaurant than they are at a meat market. So it has made a huge difference for our profitability and our long-term stability to be in the new spot. But our growth now looks like maximizing our potential in this spot.
So you're no longer in the other spot whatsoever. Is that correct? The OG spot, the original spot is you're not there. The spot that created the restaurant in the first place. That was the place that go on.
I rebuilt the whole thing in the new spot. We turned the lights off in one spot and turned the lights on in the other spot an hour later, and we did not miss a day of service.
It's incredible.
Yeah, I mean, we sold all the stuff that was there, on an auction afterwards, and just rolling. We lost a lot of customers. A lot of people were pissed, but we gained a lot of customers too. And it's never fun to lose a customer, but at the same time, you've got to do what's right for your business and make sure that you keep the vision for your business, your employees, and your business, and make sure it's all what you want. So that was the right move. We do so much more business, and we're so much more efficient, and it's just a much better business now.
Let's talk about that a little bit. Improvements from one location to the next, things that you learned the first go round that you really put into the next one. Let's really narrow that down, because I think that's important, because it's part of your growth too. I think personally, you having this opportunity to improve the business that you built, that's also the thing here. If we stay in our old spaces or confined too much creatively, we can't grow ourselves or our businesses. So I want to focus on all those sort of improvements and creativity and growth that you used into the next location.
Yeah, on our restaurant side, we really increased our batch sizing. We went from, we started making huge amounts of everything because our volume went up. So now we could, the labor hour over prep, volume, that ratio increased dramatically. We bought a few machines to help us like make patties and cut chips, and the machines cut labor drastically. And we bought bigger equipment so that, the same amount of cooks could produce bigger volumes. So we didn't actually increase our staffing that much. We maybe increased our staffing by a third in order to, 4x our revenue at our restaurant, which was awesome. Awesome. And then we opened in 2019. And then, of course, within 1 year, COVID came. And we actually had to make a big hard choice, which was that we weren't going to do whole animals anymore. All our butchers left. The guys who cut the animals left, for good reason. I don't blame them. I mean, COVID was horrible. And the slaughterhouses were not able to continue to slaughter the animals we needed at the pace we needed. So basically, we found a different slaughterhouse in town that was able to continue to get us locally raised, antibiotic-free animals, but could just sell us the parts that we needed. So instead of buying a whole hog, now we can buy just a shoulder when we want one, or just a belly when we want one. And same with the beef. Instead of buying a whole beef, now we can just buy this cut and that cut. And it made us dramatically more efficient. And after COVID, I cut about half the menu items off of PigWich, the restaurant. Things that took too long to make or weren't profitable enough. And people were pissed about that, but it was the right thing to do. And, it has allowed us to grow in a way that is profitable, efficient, and easier for our staff to execute. And, you lose some customers, but you gain new ones. The old ones learn to like a new thing, and, you just move on. Like our pork tenderloin was a top 3 seller for us, but it was super expensive to make. It took forever. The machine that made it was dangerous, and I just said, we're not doing it anymore. I mean, that sandwich and another sandwich were featured on Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives, and I still took them off the menu and tweaked them because it just wasn't the most efficient, profitable thing we could be making. And I think you got to just keep that in mind, especially, we're at a $10 price point. We're trying to move things out in 7 to 8 minutes. you got to focus on the things that work.
Yeah, I
And
agree. Go ahead.
oh, I was going to say, and that's just, all of those things have turned what was a break-even business into something that can support, me and my business partner. I mean, we still work in the business full time, and we're not buying BMWs or anything, but we live in the life we want to live, which is, what it's all about.
Yeah, I like this. Talk to me about the partnership. Talk to me about dividing up responsibilities. Obviously, it's been successful. So, how do you manage all of it?
Yeah.
Divide
I
up, know
mean,
your superpowers, your weaknesses,
yeah,
because it matters in a successful partnership.
it does. I mean, my partner, Matt Kafka, is good at a certain bucket of things. I'm good at a certain bucket of things. We're both able to say that out loud without getting upset about it. And we both have checklists of things we need to do daily, weekly, and monthly. And, we both do them. And when one of us needs to go on vacation or wants to go on a trip or whatever, the other one pitches in and does the other side's task list. And, it's a pretty functional partnership all in all.
I love it. Let's talk about mentorship for you, personal growth. We talked a little bit about it before in instilling in your employees what was given to you as a cook, but let's talk about a little bit about growth. How do you stay growing? How do you make sure your business stays growing? We talked about slimming it down. So I think that there's some misunderstanding that doesn't, just because we slim down our menus, we make our things more efficient, doesn't mean that we're not growing or learning things. That would be a growing there that happened. The
Yeah.
business was able to grow because it became concentrated on the things it was good at. Even
Yeah.
though
Yeah.
the sandwich may be popular, what are we actually
Yeah.
good at?
Yeah,
Go
I
ahead.
mean, focusing on things we're good at is absolutely things I talk about with my staff. Growth for me now and is, I try and set annual goals that I break up into quarterly chunks, that I break up into monthly chunks, so that I can keep pushing on them. But honestly, it's modest. I've got 3 kids under 11, and my wife is a full-time professional. So, and I want to be home and see them. So. I'm not in a real big growth phase of my life right now, and I'm okay with that. I've got a lot of career left, and right now I want to make sure the business that I'm operating is running as efficiently and profitably as it can be, and that's a lot of our goals right now. And I try and explain the reasonings for the changes I do make to our staff to make sure they understand, why we're doing this. What are the goals? What are we looking to do this quarter, next quarter, so that they can stay motivated. But, thankfully we have an amazing staff. Keeping them motivated has never really been an issue, if I'm going to be honest. We run a fairly lean team, and we have a tip share program that is really successful. We have no servers. Everybody splits tips, and everybody is pretty well aligned to, keep customers happy and keep hours in a generally good area. So some of the motivation is just setting up the infrastructure for staff to want to come in and to have our incentives aligned.
I love it. This will be my last question for you. The if you could tell yourself anything or any group of things back when you started that now that you wish you knew then, back when you started the very first Local Pig, what would it be? What would those things be?
Yeah, God, I wish I had that chance. It would be slow down. I was in a big hurry, both literally and metaphorically. Within 2 years of opening Local Pig, we had opened another restaurant. I had consulted for 2 more restaurants, and we had opened a sausage plant, a sausage making USDA plant, and within 5 years had shut down that restaurant, that sausage plant, and Local Pig was just squeaking it out. And I was just in some kind of massive hurry. And I wish I had listened to people that had told me to slow down, you know, and build more slowly, build better, and take your time. And that's, I didn't take my time enough when I was younger. I've learned the lesson now almost completely. I still have, it's not perfect, but that's the big one, was just, you got a long life, you got a long career. You can do all the things you want, but if you try and do everything all at once, you're not going to get anything done correctly.
I agree with you. I knew it was my last question, but I fibbed, I guess. I do have one more. Talk to me about sourcing. You mentioned it earlier, antibiotic free. I didn't ask the question. I skipped over it, but I want to make sure I get back to it because I think it's important for your brand. You source your ingredients to a high quality so that your brand also has the high quality. I think that's important. Can we quick talk about that?
Yeah. So our meats all come from local farms. So it's actually gotten easier over the years, but when we first started, it was very much just mom and pop guys, one pig, one cow here and there. But, we now have a great chicken farm that's 20 miles from the restaurants, and they bring us about 100 fresh chickens every week. And another chicken farm down a little farther away that brings us a bunch of chicken trim that we use for our sandwiches. We found a great beef supplier that is vertically integrated. He owns the animals, the farm, and the slaughterhouse. We buy all the beef from him. We have a great pork processor, Paradise Locker. They do amazing work. They have a network of 3 to 5 pork farms around, and they do the slaughter and they sell us the parts that we want. So we buy directly from farmers or the slaughterhouse for 99% of our products. We have one guy who does ducks and rabbits and duck eggs, another guy that just does the turkeys for us. So it takes time. It's more expensive, but having those locally raised animals that aren't full of antibiotics and do have, a better quality of life, it's a better quality product, and it's a differentiator for us to, it's not, you can't buy that at Costco. We'll never compete with Costco on the cost of a steak, but we can offer a better steak.
Yeah, and more variety of proteins for the human palate. I mean, it's important that we diversify our proteins, not just the 3 main ones we talked about. I do think it's important to eat protein. It's also important to diversify it. I think we lack the understanding, especially with the way marketing advertising is done today. This on my side, I'll say this, is that we don't understand the impact that we could have by diversifying our protein intake and our fruit and vegetable intake. It's not monocropping, it's diversity of things. And that's just the way we are. That's how we get different nutrition and vitamins and minerals in our bodies in all sorts of natural ways. So it's just important as a note. It's important we offer that in our businesses and think about if we want to differentiate, there's also alternatives out there. Do we have to build a new type of audience for those things? Yeah, sure. There's a lot of trailblazers that do things like this. It's a matter of whether or not you want to in your business. And I would say what you did, talking about the longevity of your business, we're talking about someone that was doing something before it really became popular. Let's go back to the artisanal butcher shop concept. Like everyone's like, oh, we finally got out of the butcher shops. They went in the grocery stores. And then we see a reverse and we see people going back to the basics, the core of it, the localness of the local butcher shop. Hence the name Local Pig. I'm sure I didn't ask you about the name, but I'm sure that's to do with that.
Yeah.
And
that's it. Yeah.
I just stumbled upon it unintentionally, but it's sort of that. And I think it's important that we, there's some things that aren't meant to be improved upon. There's some things that are meant to be improved upon, but locally sourcing our products is important. It's important to our diet. It's important to our health. We all know local honey, at least I think we know now that local honey is good for allergies. If we have allergies during the seasons, bring honey into your diet, local honey, so there's things like this that are important. It's also important to diversify the diet. I love the standard. Alex, is there anything that I didn't discuss that you want to discuss or anything that you feel might be beneficial for the audience?
No, I think we covered everything, man. This was a great interview. Thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome. And where can they find you online? Where can they come try your food, social media, all
Sure.
those good things?
Sure. So yeah, if you're in Kansas City, we are in the city market right downtown. We're at localpig.com. We're at pigwich.com and at Instagram and Facebook on Local Pig KC and PigWich KC. That's PIGWICH.
Awesome. Thank you, Alex. I appreciate you coming on the show. Thank you, audience, for listening in. You guys know where to find us. Again, Gorilla Brave is the community. You can find us on Spotify or anywhere else you go yourself through podcasts. How can you support the entrepreneurs on the show? Follow them on social media, like their stuff. If you're in those cities, go try the food, dine at their restaurants, support them in that way. If you're traveling through those places, try the food as well. That's a way to support them. And obviously, if you want to support the show or the episode, just like, share, comment on it. That helps do that. So that answers those questions for everyone. That helps you guys support the show and the episodes. We see those particular episodes do a lot better. Just so if you want to support the entrepreneur, get their story out there, that's the best way to do it. That's what I can tell you guys. Also, thank you guys for all the support over it. We are recording feverishly, so continue. If you want to be on the show or interested to be on the show, click the link. And I love you guys, and we're out.